Welcome to another episode of Legal for Tech, the podcast. So, guys, you recognize my voice. It's always Rosie here. And as I've said many, many times, this is just a group of students and young professionals who are very interested in technology. And yes, it's regulation, but today it is actually about technology, I promise. So, today I'm joined by my friend and colleague Giacomo. Hi, Giacomo.
Hi, Rosie. Very excited to discuss these things. And I think today is going to be super interesting.
Yes, I'm super excited. I actually heard this person from the BBC, and that's for me, like, on top of the scale. But it's a very, very, very interesting topic and an even more interesting person. Hello, Shayne Longpre.
Hi, Rosie, Giacomo. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited. And I want to know everything about your career. Please don't start from the day you were born, but after that, everything has to be told. How did you come up with this amazing idea and tell our listeners because they're definitely waiting for it.
That's a very generous introduction. Thank you. I'll start by saying that my background is in machine learning and AI. So I'm a researcher. Before that, actually, I studied economics, and I was really excited about understanding sort of the effects of technology on society. I was really interested in antitrust and how there could be entrenched monopolies from data moats and other such things. But I realized to get a job, at least in the part of America where I was working, it really helped to have technical background. And so I got very interested. I thought at a bad time in natural language processing, NLP, because all of the famous people had started, a decade before anybody knew what this was. And by the time I joined, everybody sort of knew about it. But now I feel like it was an opportune moment because things have just gotten bigger and bigger with ChatGPT and other technologies that have been released. So I worked mainly on pre-training models and then later on post-training models. What that means is just curating text data in the right way and filtering it and balancing it so that you train models to be more capable in conversation and discussion and more knowledgeable about the world. And long story short, at Google during an internship, we released this large collection of collections of data sets called Flan. And when we released that, it had a big splash, it was very popular, and we got many, many emails week after week of people asking which subset of the data can they use, should they use, are they ethically allowed to use for their business, legally allowed? And I didn't know, so I went to lawyers, and they didn't really have a good idea either, had very hedging answers, and had a process to try to tell us based off of, these different criteria, what data set might be used in what case. And so I thought it would be really helpful if we released this. So me and a group of MIT students, where I was started doing my PhD, and other international students started working on trying to provide the legal annotations for where data sets came from, what the licenses on them were, which licenses are maybe applicable or not applicable to different use cases, such as if you're an academic or researcher or you're commercializing something. And that's expanded into an organization called the Data Provenance Initiative, where we've done research for the last couple of years and expanded to about 50 members from 20 countries around the world. I don't know if we have any Italian people yet. I have to double check, but we have basically every other European and neighboring
Always ready
country
to be
covered.
hired, I promise you.
Well, you're welcome to join. We definitely need legal minds to help us think through these things.
In terms, just before we proceed with the next question, but there's something that I really need to know being a lawyer. Um, in terms of the type of legal patterns that you found, were you focusing on intellectual property rights or were you looking at privacy as well?
We focus mainly on intellectual property and copyright within that. There are privacy concerns, but I feel like the privacy angle is a little bit more known in previous versions of AI, whereas it's not the first time, but the first larger trend where large AI models can generate new content, where the question of whether it's new or an original or too similar to what it was trained on is a question, whereas prior models were often not as generative, and therefore it was more about privacy than copyright.
Okay, thank you. Well, please, Giacomo, let's go with the second question then.
Sure. I'm super interested. So, I would like to ask you about one of your recent work. You've explored the emerging AI crawler wars and their impact on the web data availability. Could you elaborate a little bit on how is the availability of data changing?
Yeah, so for some context, I think the most interesting study we've released, we were very fortunate to have it covered by the New York Times, and so it got a lot of attention. And basically, the story was this. Most of the data used to train large language models is taken from the web using crawlers. And these are little automatic machines, just like we explore the web, they explore the web, jump from website to website, and they copy what they see. And so this has been used for decades, mainly for search engines like Google or Bing to map the web so they can direct you to the right place when you type in a search query. But many other industries and increasingly AI. And so we wanted to know, um, in the context of AI, how much data is available from web crawling. Now, why would it be different from Google search or other industries or other types of crawling and uses? Is because on every website or popular website, you can go to the website like NewYorkTimes.com backslash robots.txt. Anybody can go do that right now and look at this page that's meant for these crawlers. It's not meant for humans so much as to tell crawlers. They read it and it tells them what parts of the website you have permission to look at and what parts of the website they don't want you to look at. And so this is kind of the traditional mechanism by which websites indicate or interoperate with crawlers. But the interesting thing is it's not legally enforceable, but people tend to respect it out of sort of for ethical reasons. We can go into that more later. Um, and increasingly, many websites are saying, no, don't look at my website at all to crawlers from AI companies or AI developers. And not just AI companies, they're disallowing many more because they can't even keep track of all the crawlers. It's a hard thing to do. You run a website and you have to suddenly become an expert on the hundreds of different crawlers that are on the web. So they're trying to disallow as many as possible because they're afraid of how their data might be taken and potentially used to replace them. Maybe someone can go ask ChatGPT or Claude or other chat tools about information that they used to have to go to your website to get and be served ads and bring revenue to that website. So they're scared of being replaced. And the point of our article was to show the backlash by websites to try to prevent the AI models training on their data. And this adds up to a large portion of the most popular websites.
Wow, it sounds like, I mean, if you tell me without knowing what AI is and everything, I think they actually have a legitimate say, these websites, because I mean, they put in work, they put in effort to create some content, and then AI is coming and it's just feeding off its material. But at the same time, I'm thinking that I mean, AI is a technology that we have introduced in the world, and it can make everyone more productive. That's a very good point, and it is an advantage of AI. So, what I mean, as much as the interest of these single websites is important, what is the benefit to society that AI accesses that data, and to what extent is this kind of block, this wall that these websites are creating, going to decline the possibility that AI does bring this benefit to society?
Great questions. I'm going to break these up because there's so many points to make here. The first is that there's something called scaling laws, which is a academic principle in AI, which says pretty simply, the more data you train on, the better your model will be. And also, the larger your model in terms of the number of parameters, the better it will be. And so the best models nowadays get a lot of their performance by making very big models that are very computationally expensive and train them on trillions of words on the web. And so as a lot of this data is increasingly less available or unavailable, if you respect the website's permission, then the new models will have less data to train on and will be potentially less capable. The scarier thing is also that the websites that are most protective of their data are tend to be news websites, artists, social media forums, those that really make money from have people engage on that platform. So if you're like a blog or maybe an organization's website, you don't care that much whether people go to your website or they get information that you put on your website elsewhere. But news and social media forums really do. And so those websites often have the most amount of data. In the case of news, the latest and highest quality, most, editorialized, like carefully nuanced, factual data. And in the case of social media, the most diverse data, like think of YouTube, like how much content from educational videos to podcasts to gaming videos that are on there. And so often the best content for AI models is that which is foreclosed and protected most quickly. So to answer the first part of your question, I think this will have a big impact. And the way that AI companies are getting around it is they're trying to license deals with these websites, or at least the big ones. So it doesn't help small creators, but it helps big websites sort of license that data. But when you have exclusive contracts, you can kind of segment the web into like these are the websites that OpenAI can access, these are the ones that Anthropic can access, and these are the ones that Google can access, and nobody else can access them. So it can be a little bit unfair and have sort of someone described it as the tragedy of the anti-commons. It's sort of a principle by which there's less access for everybody else as big companies claim, these islands. Um, Notably, Rosie, you talked a little bit about, balancing innovation with protecting maybe rights of the websites and the work they put in. That's what copyright and intellectual property is motivated by. It's wanting to protect people's motivation to create something and to profit off of it in some occasions, while also allowing people to build and innovate on it. And so it's actually a very tricky thing to balance um, how to do this. And I think people are still working out how we get the benefits of generative AI while also protecting many creators.
I find it very interesting what you just said because, for example, there have been claimed by the BBC and other news organizations that have been saying that ChatGPT and, for example, Apple News has been misinterpreting their news. And they've been
Mm.
blaming it on AI not working uh, accurately or properly or 100%. I mean, they don't have perfect performances and everything, but I mean, basically, what you are hinting to, if I'm not mistaken, is that these mistakes can also be caused by the policies that news organizations have in basically locking the access to some specific data to the extent that AI can't process the right quality of data. Is this correct?
Well, yeah, I guess what I'm saying is it's mainly a competition angle, but if you're a new company that wants to create, or maybe you're a nonprofit, or maybe you're an academic researcher and you want to train a model for some useful, different use, you're not competing with news, maybe, you won't have access anymore to train on most of them because it's been locked down or those rights have been sold to sort of one company. This is an issue for web archives, like the Internet Archive or Common Crawl from which tens of thousands of academic articles have been written and bring sort of transparency to the open web, whereby people can sort of study and look at things. Now, um, you can still look at websites if you're a human, but there's more paywalls, there's more sort of preventions to look, more deeply. And if you're a bot, regardless of how you're used or how you respect, the website's data, there are more and more barriers being put up, both legal, technological, and signaling. So I think it's just becoming more complicated. And th these are good things in some cases because maybe news can now be compensated whereby they might not have been. But also we need to protect some of the nonprofit and research and benevolent other non-AI uses that rely on an open, transparent web.
Yeah, because I mean, at the end of the day, it's all a matter of money if we put it this way, no? But
Hmm.
um, I guess that this issue that you've been talking about all relates to the big kind of elephant in the room, which is the idea that, I mean, the overuse of AI models, especially LLMs, is going to replace our way of getting to know things, but in a
Mm.
detrimental way, because there is this phenomenon of AI collapse. Is this all linked
Mm.
to it?
Yeah, so model collapse. There's a famous paper from I think a year or 2 years ago now that showed that if you train a language model in some data and then you get to generate new data, um, and then you train a new model on the data that it generated. So it's kind of the snake eats its own tail. And you do this repeatedly. So the model generates data, you train a new model on that data. Eventually, the model gets really bad. It collapses. It can't generate new interesting information. Um, because what a model does, it compresses all the information in the world. It's kind of a information reasoning compression machine. And so if you do it once, the fear is that you get cultural homogenization. So maybe what that means is most of the web is written by English speaking, Western centric, American or North American people, maybe some Chinese as well. But there's not a lot of representation from Africa or South America, or less represented cultures and countries. And so you get sort of models that only will represent some cultures. And what they even do is they collapse the language. So they start using some words way more, like the word delve was very famous, and other words less. And you can actually change the culture. There are hundreds of millions of users. And if people and kids in schools rely on this, it will literally shape how people speak, how they think. Um, that's the concern. I'm not scared that model collapse will happen because in a lab setting, people don't just train on synthetic data. They do it more carefully. They sort of curate a lab environment, and actually, synthetic data and careful doses can be helpful in making the model better.
Looking at the what is happening in the world from a legislative point of view, not just in the US, in the whole world, and how they respond to this problematic effect of the use of AI models. Do you see any legislation that you maybe have analyzed or you have seen that has better approached the issue that you talked about? And also, do you think that the policymakers are agnostic, agnostic of this phenomenon?
Yeah, that's a great question, and maybe you have some thoughts on this because I feel like EU is doing more than the Americans. The US is just about, making sure that companies are unencumbered, innovation, let them do whatever, I think is the kind of sentiment. And it's very hard to pass laws in the US right now. So it's unlikely, despite some people's attempts, that things will change there, but maybe at the state level. So there's a lot of effort among states to increase transparency among models. There's also a legal safe harbor that's interesting for researchers. So it's saying if you're a researcher and you want to expose issues with the model, then as long as you follow some basic rules, like you disclose it to the developer and give them 30 or 60 days to like fix it, and you aren't malicious in your use, that you should not be it shouldn't be possible to prosecute you for doing this. And so this is allowing independent researchers to go and find all the issues with these models, including their effects on children, cybersecurity issues with other softwares, agents interoperate with new types of software, or the cultural effects of these models. Right now, the terms of use prevents a lot of this testing for many of the systems. So there's increasingly attention in these areas on developing laws for this, but mainly the EU is doing this, and the code of practice is being negotiated right now as we're having this podcast. It's a very intense negotiation. The American stance is affecting it, but mainly they're just fighting for more transparency and trying to figure more out about the copyright world. So the EU has the text and data mining exception for those that, look at intellectual property in Europe. Um, Basically, yeah, there's a big question as to sort of in Europe, they're firmer about protecting researchers and nonprofits, I think, in getting access to data, including on the web that we're talking about. I think, and I don't know a ton about this, but it's more complicated for profit-seeking data reuse.
Um, from just from the business point of view, and we know that I mean some of these tech companies that develop AI models are very, very big. I'm not just thinking of OpenAI, which is clearly very big, but I mean if one thinks of, I don't know, Microsoft and the Meta of the situation, these are very big companies. I mean, you said you studied economics, so I think you understand my question. Um, in terms of economies of scale, wouldn't it be better to just leave them do the job? It seems like they have all the resources, and the more data they get, the better model they give us. So, like, why should we diversify and allow more transparency?
Well, I think transparency is agnostic of competition. It just allows you to have better accountability, better understanding in the community. But I think your question had a subtle intention, and I think you're absolutely right. It's that having a monopoly doesn't mean that you have, or oligopoly, that you have better systems. It means that there's a lack of competition. There's competition right now, but we are worried that the data will be monopolized and spoken for in the future, which could lead to monopolies like you've seen in social media with Facebook and others, where in Instagram, whereby they sort of have like, full control for the most part, and are difficult to unseat. Um, I also believe that so much this depends on access to data and copyright and how that pans out. But let's just assume everything is fair use in the American concept, meaning that we can train on everything. Um, it's been shown by models like DeepSeek out of China that actually, um, their final run was 6 million or $6 to $8 million, I believe. Now they spent, I think, billions on compute and labor and experts to do this. But if they just released their entire system of data collection, they released the data set and they released their model training pipeline. Let's say they made all of that public, not just the final model weights. Um, that means that someone else could go and for less than $10 million right now train a model that is of that quality. So I really believe in the next 5 years, it will be affordable for people for less than $5 million to train phenomenal models themselves. So the only barrier then, in my mind, won't be capital and compute expense so much as access to data.
Before we go to the usual final question, we would like to know what stance do you take in relation to the copyright dispute?
Oh, I have to leave. This call is breaking up. I People feel very emotionally and very strong about this question because their livelihoods are affected or they care about the future of AI and innovation. We try not to weigh in on this. Like our main goal is to bring transparency. And at the end of the day, what I disagree with is that there's one stance, like AI is wrong, it's terrible, and it's in every case it should not have access to the data, or people that believe AI should have access to every data, it doesn't matter what. Those are the wrong stances in my view. I think that we need balanced stance to think about, maybe our news should be protected and artists should be protected in certain cases, but maybe some other uses or sort of other data that wasn't commercialized before and they're just looking for an opportunity to like, sell it. Maybe that doesn't need to be protected. Copyright's very complicated. There are many aspects that decide in the US and in Europe whether or not something is copyright infringement. And usually it's a case by case analysis, one source of data and one use. And so it's really difficult right now because we're asked to draw lines across the entire economy for all data sets and like AI and other uses. But I think that we need to take the time to sort of think through those processes and find the right balance that will allow people to develop AI fairly and responsibly, um, but also respect the sources of data that need the most protecting.
So, your solution would be instead of looking at from the point of view of the type of technology, so the type of tool, let's look at the type of data the tool uses. So it's kind of like um, regulating the other side rather than regulating the thing that does it.
Well, sir, I guess both. I'm a little bit more familiar as a non-lawyer, but I've been told by my lawyer friends in the US there's a four-factor test for fair use.
Mm.
And these have to do with sort of one of them has to do with I think the most important one here in my mind is the use. So like AI is not a use. Like AI systems are just a tool used for something. If the AI system is giving you news, then the news that it trained on to give you that information, if it's sort of prevent if its use is the same as that of the data it took, then that's more likely that it would be unethical or unfair or an infringement, not fair use in the US because it's doing that. But if you train on news data, you train on New York Times data, but then the model writes poetry, maybe then it's less likely that that would be infringement. The courts will figure this out. Maybe it is. I'm not an expert, but the parallel between the difference or similarity between the use of the system and the use of the data used to train the system, I think is an important question.
So no, I understand what you mean. So your point is like you don't want to use AI to copy what's there. You want to use AI to, for example, use the right language. And of course, the news have really, really high quality. If we think of the New York Times, the articles there are of really high quality. And I think this point is very much missed. Maybe it's worth reiterating for our listeners as well. It's very much missed that there's a difference. I mean, these models we're talking about are large language models. That's their focus. They're not large news models or large extermination models or I don't know, large tyrannical models. That's a spin that we put on them. This is just a tool, as you said, it's AI. Um, but there is no mastermind behind it, no iRobot, new machinery. Uh, so thank you for explaining all of this to us. This was incredibly, incredibly interesting, and I'm sure our listeners will appreciate the differentiation that you made there, which is really, really important also in terms of regulation in the future. But before we let you go, as Giacomo said, we have a one last question that we ask all of our guests, and the reason is we want our listeners to get the greatest experience possible into understanding the topic in depth. And because it's really difficult to find the right material, especially in this era of disinformation, can you provide us with a couple of suggestions on podcasts, books, TV series, movies, documentaries, anything that will help us understand this problem further?
Yeah, great question. I think a colleague of mine put out a book that's fantastic at dispelling the misconceptions of AI. So it's broader than sort of data or copyright, but because there's so much hype and attention right now and confusion about what's real, what's not, what are the risks. AI Snake Oil is a book that was released from Princeton Press. It's really excellent at dispelling these myths. Written by experts that really know this inside out and are on the cutting edge. Um, for the copyright side of things in AI and copyright, I should say, because maybe some of your listeners or you already have, a lot of familiarity with copyright and law. There's the Gen Law Workshop, GEN Law Workshop that Catherine Lee and others have put together. And that is the venue right now, the best venue I've seen for AI and law papers, academic papers that have been published and discussed, and they have a blog, and the work there also highlights the difference between, which we didn't get into today, but like the discussion between inputs to models and outputs and what part, is memorization of a model infringing or just if it generates similar outputs and debates that are ongoing right now.
Okay, that's amazing. I'm gonna go find this, especially the AI snake oil book. I've had it in my chart on Amazon, and I think I will go and buy it. And yes, other websites and marketplaces are available. And I will. Thank you very much, Shayne Longpre. Perhaps we will have another conversation on the topic we didn't manage to cover this time. It was a real pleasure and an honor to hear your story and to get to know all of this. This is particularly important to us. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. And please don't hesitate to reach out or any of your viewers. I'd love to chat more about this. And yeah, really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Rosie and Giacomo.
Thank you.